gamers, and welcome back. I'm Rob, of course, our Warshack if you want to call me by my in-game name, and it's about that time that we do our monthly meta video going over the most popular decks in Hearthstone. Keep in mind that I was unable to post this at the first of the month when I normally post these videos due to the fact that the new expansion, Mean Streets of Gadgetzan, is out. There was no telling what was going to be the most popular decks, right? The new archetypes rise, old archetypes die, so we've kind of let it sit for a couple days. We've been able to, I've actually played a lot, and we've seen, I would have to say, 95% of the decks that we're gonna see currently. By the end of the month, obviously when this video is at its most outdated point, some of these decks may have changed a little bit, but currently we're a week in, and this is what you can expect to see on ladder in what seems to be the most popular deck. So our first one is going to be Warlock, and this is going to be the Reno Warlock. This is, in my opinion, and a lot of streamers' opinion, one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful deck out right now. The reason being is not only does it have Reno now, but it has a card named Kazakis, and that card is absolutely insane by himself or in combination with Brand to be able to create yourself 2 potions instead of 1. Overall, the one of decks got a huge boost with a lot of the cards that were released, and of course, Renolock being one of the strongest, or I would say the strongest out of all the classes, in the sense of where you put Reno in it. He benefits the most because of the life tapping ability, allows you to draw and you sacrifice health. Health isn't actually that big of a deal because you have Reno, so it works hand in hand, and that's what makes this deck really, really powerful. It's not that it curves out really well like some decks like Midrange Shaman. It's just the fact that it has a really good late game with Lord Jaraxxus, right? You automatically beat aggro with cards like Reno Jackson. You have a good amount of taunts, so you can kind of wait a little bit and you're not Renoing when your opponent still has like 5 or 6 cards on the board, and then they can still kill you right after that. It's got the ability and tools to deal with mid-range with the Fellfire potions and cards like Abyssal Enforcer. So there's just a lot of resources that this deck has to be able to take on aggro, mid-range, and even other control decks, and I think that's what makes it really powerful right now. Hopefully it's hard to explain a deck in like less than a minute or two, but I'm doing my best here, guys. And as always, we'll be doing the deck guides on all these decks, so if I have the deck guide already out, I'll put that on the side, but if it's not there, expect the deck guide to come soon. The next class is going to be Rogue, and that's going to be the basic Malygos Rogue. This has basically no changes with the new cards whatsoever, because what we found out is some of the older decks are still just as good, and you don't need to add anything. So you'll find a lot of people on ladder just running the same old Malygos Rogue, and it'll perform just as well as one of the new decks, maybe even better. So if you've seen any of our previous most popular decks, I've gone over this a lot. It's an OTK deck that revolves around Malygos and being able to Sinister Strike and Evis. We've played it quite a bit, and I'm not going to explain it that much. The next one is going to be more of a tempo or aggro-oriented rogue deck. We actually did the rogue deck guide on this not too long ago. It's been modified a little bit, but most of the time on ladder, you're going to be seeing some form of this type of pirate rogue aggro-ish deck. I would have to say it runs very similar to the Pirate Warrior, where it wants to kill you as fast as possible, and instead of using cards like Arcane Reaper and Upgrade, it does so with Evis and I can't even think of the name, the Cold Blood. It was at the tip of my tongue. So the next class we're going to cover is Priest, which actually got a really good amount of cards in this expansion. This is going to be the Reno Priest. It runs, I would have to say, very similar to the Reno Warlock deck, but I don't know. I just feel like the Warlock has a better late game with cards like Jaraxxus. Like, you just can't beat Jaraxxus late game with the 2 mana summon a 6/6 basically. But this, I think it will perform a little bit better against aggro because of the healing mechanic. Also because there's dragons, and dragons have a good amount of taunts. Whether you're talking about the early game, where is he now? The agent, or the mid-game Twilight Guardian. So there's a lot of resources in here. I think this might do better a little bit against aggro in comparison to the Reno, but the Reno has the better late game. So it's like if you're finding a ton of like aggro, then this is your pick. But if you're finding like a variety of aggro, mid-range, and control, then N'Zoth Warlock or the Reno Warlock is probably your best pick. The next one's going to be straight up Dragon Priest. Before we talked about the Reno Dragon, and this is just the straight dragon with no Reno. I would have to say this is more of a more tempo mid-game deck where you're going to be able to win around turn 8 or 9 when you've basically destroyed your opponent's board with Shadow Word Pain, Bookworm, Shadow Word Death, and then you've got cards like Guardian, Blackwing Corruptor, and the Operative to basically just clean up your opponent very nicely. Unfortunately, this deck gets destroyed by control decks because this deck has no late game. It has a good early game, it's got a solid mid game, but besides that, it doesn't really have the utensils needed to destroy control. So if you're finding a lot in aggro, Priest is normally the way to go, and especially this Dragon Priest deck. And these are my builds of the deck, guys. If you have other builds, or you're just like, oh, where's your Dragonfire potion, feel free to sub it in. The lists aren't like this exact list. Everybody has a few cards that they tech in and out, so this is just basically the shell of the Dragon Priest, not necessarily the exact one you'll see on ladder, so just keep that in mind. Moving to the next class is going to be the Druid, and this is going to be the standard Malygos Druid. A lot of people are just running Malygos Druid, no new cards, because either they just don't want to buy them, and second, this deck performs really well on its own. It doesn't really need any tweaking. Unfortunately, it's not the Jade Druid where you can just summon a whole bunch of huge creatures, but this deck normally beats it to it. This is a little bit faster than the Jade Golem Druid, so if you just feel like Jade Golem takes too long to kind of ramp up to the point that you need, this deck has the OTK combo with Malygos, but it also has the huge cards with Arcane Golem and Rag that allow you to kind of lay down the law, and you've got the ramp to get there. So still a very viable deck, and will definitely get you far if you know how to play it. This is probably one of the hardest decks to play, in my opinion. Druid's a very, very interesting deck with a lot of options every single turn. The next one's going to be the Jade Golem Druid. You're going to be finding this a lot. Most likely, if you play against a Druid on ladder, it's going to be this variant of the deck, but you still see the Malygos, which is why I wanted to include it in there. The basis of this deck is to ramp just the same as all Druids, with cards like the Jade Blossom and Nourish. From there, they're just going to drop Jade Behemoth and their Black Paw to be able to summon Jade Golems, and eventually you'll be unable to deal with the amount of Jade Golems they bring out because they've got a card named Jade Idol, which shuffles 3 more of that card into the deck, which has the ability to summon 1 Jade Golem. So they're never going to get milled. They have infinite resources, and in the late game, you will always lose versus Druid. So there's no out attritioning Druid. Druid will always win. So you basically have to beat this deck before it gets to the point where the Jade Golems are just too big to handle. The next one's going to be Hunter. Unfortunately, this is a class that you won't really see much on ladder at all. I think I've gone against it twice in like all the week that I've playing, and I've played hundreds of games so far, and I haven't really seen a lot of Hunter, but the Hunter I did see was a kind of a secret beast hunter, and this is what I would imagine it to look like. I'm not really sure what its strengths and weaknesses are. It basically looks like the same Hunter we see that we used to see with the secrets, but instead of having more of a late game with Rag and Call to Wild, you're pushing an earlier game with like Smuggler's Crate and Alley Cat, just to be able to keep up with the very quick meta that we're seeing now with the Pirate Warrior and the Pirate Shaman that's actually arised. So I wouldn't really recommend this deck, but if you go against Hunter, expect something like this. The next one's going to be Warrior, which is by far the most variety out of all classes that I've seen on ladder so far, and the first one that we're going to go over is going to be the Pirate Warrior. This is going to be, I want to say, like 80 or 90% of all warriors you go against will be playing a very, very similar list to this. We actually released our deck guide on this, which explains it in very great detail and shows the inner workings and the synergies within all the cards. So if you're looking for a much more in-depth analysis and descriptions of each and every card in this deck, check out the deck guide. I should be putting the annotation there if I'm not lazy. And the deck basically wants to kill you as soon as possible, and it does it very, very well with cards like N'Zoth's First Mate, Patches, Small Time Buccaneer. It has weapons which they upgrade, and that gets comboed with the Bloodsail Cultist. They've got cards like Frothing Berserker, so you can't deal with it. So not only are you having to deal with a swarm of small minions on the board that can deal a large quantity of damage, you have to deal with weapons that do a large quantity of damage over a number of turns as well, because this deck revolves around keeping their durability up with cards like Upgrade and the Bloodsail Cultist. Very, very difficult deck to beat if your current deck that you're running isn't really teched against aggro. This deck will destroy any greedy deck, absolutely annihilate. So a lot of the decks that are being built right now are being built with this deck solely in mind. Like if it can withstand aggro Palladin, or not aggro Palladin, but Pirate Warrior, we're all good. And I don't know why I keep getting all my decks mixed up. It's been a long night. And the next one's going to be basically Taunt Warrior, Bolster Warrior. Not a very popular deck right now, but still a deck that you might run into and you should know. If they start throwing down the I know a guys and the Bolster or the Stolen Goods, expect some really beefy taunt minions, I guess you could say. So save your removal for those, not so much the Ravaging Ghoul. It doesn't really have any late game. This deck is basically only built to defeat the aggro and the mid-range going around there, because there's no way for those decks to get around some of the taunts in here, because they don't run cards like Execute, Shield Slam. Even some Shamans are cutting Hex, so they just don't have the utensils to get past like a 5-12 taunt. It would take like 4 or 5 of their minions, and at that point there's no point. They just lose. They just run out of cards because they're just smacking their faces against these giant taunt minions. So you'll find if you go against a lot of aggro mid-range, you could run this deck, and you'll do very, very well. And the next one's going to be Mage, the Reno Mage. Again, very similar to most of the Reno decks we've gone over. The Priest, the Warlock follows the same kind of, there's no huge burst potential or OTK you're looking for. You're just looking to find Reno, making sure you don't die, and then you take a very control-based path from there, trying to get as much value as you can, get your opponent to run out of steam, and then from there basically play Kazakis, Brand, Kazakis, double potion, or you Alexstrasza, have a couple creatures on the board and win that way. Very slow, grindy deck. So if you enjoy the control decks and want the value, this is a good deck to look at. And yeah, that's about it. There's not a whole lot. Haven't done the deck guide on this deck yet, but it's very interesting and it's very fun. I used to play a lot of Control Mage, and it's definitely good stuff. And the next one's going to be Palladin. Again, this is a class that you're really not going to see a whole lot of on ladder currently, due to the fact that it's just not as powerful as some of the other decks like Pirate Warrior. But this particular deck revolves around Smuggler's Run and the, where is he? I know he's in here. The Grim Street Outfitter. So you're buffing the cards in your hand, going for big swing turns where you're playing like 3-drop 5/5s or 3-drop 6/6s. They all have abilities that allow you to draw cards. They have Taunt. Then when you drop your hand, you've got cards like Divine Favor, Alkalite of Pain, and the Mean Street Marshal to kind of refill that. You've got Dawnhand Show, which can buff a card +5/+5 that hits Tyrion, or some of the other cards. I mean, a lot of decks right now can't deal with multiple medium to large size minions. So if you've got I want to say 2 or 3 minions on the board that are above 5/5 and 5/5 in stats, unless you're going against like a Warlock that can Twisting Nether. Not a lot of decks right now can deal with that. I guess Shamans can Lightning Storm twice, or Maelstrom Lightning Storm if they have spell power out. But this deck definitely has potential. It's not refined yet, but this is I guess the core of the deck you can look at. And again, it revolves around buffing the cards in your hand and playing some very sizable minions that your opponent can't really get past. The next one's gonna be, oh boy, the next one's gonna be Shaman, and this is the Aggro Shaman. Again, this is a list that, or I would say the Pirate Aggro Shaman. This current deck is still being refined, so this isn't the final form yet. It's not even its final form. And very similar to the Pirate Warrior, trying to kill you as soon as possible. It's got cards like Doomhammer and Spirit Claws, along with the Rockbiter, to be able to deal huge amounts of damage. It has spells like Lava Burst and Lightning Bolt to be able to finish your opponent off, even if they have taunts, which is kind of a good tech. So if you find yourself going against a lot of classes that are playing a lot of like not so good taunts, but just taunts that are annoying, you can kind of get around those with Shaman, because you can just Lava Burst or double Lava Burst, Lightning Bolt, or you Doomhammer, Rockbiter for 10 damage burst. It's insane. So I would have to say this isn't as good as the Pirate list right now, but it has potential to be as good or better when people play it enough. And again, a lot of these decks, there's only been, from the release till now, there's only been, I want to say, a week, maybe a little less than a week. So the core of the deck is what we're looking at, guys, not the individual cards of like, this doesn't belong here, there's no Mana Tide, it's, you know, an Arcane Knowledge or something like that. So it's just the core of the deck is what you want to kind of understand. And the next one's going to be the standard Midrange Druid, or Midrange Shaman. Jeez, Rob, I need to get the game on. I'm messing up hard. So Midrange Shaman, they've teched in a couple cards that we normally wouldn't see. The Faceless is back, the 4-drop 7/7, because like I said, there other shamans and a lot of classes are cutting their single target removal and replacing it with either AoE or cheap taunts because of the Pirate Warrior deck. So throwing in the 4-drop 7/7 and the Water Speaker to counter the aggro is a great way. The Thing from Below is a very cheap taunt. The Azure Drake keeps the gas rolling, and the Thunder Bluff basically beats control if they don't kill it in within 1 or 2 turns. So it's your basic mid-range shaman with a couple cards different, and so yeah, that's basically all the decks you're going to see on ladder, to be honest. Like, if it doesn't, when you go against a class, it's going to be one of these decks, and if it's not, you're like in the 5% that aren't running what everybody else is running. So hopefully you've enjoyed, and if I've left anything out, because I can't, of course, cover all the decks, I only can cover the most popular. Leave it in the comment section below, and hopefully people fill you in. And for those of you looking for even further information on some stuff I might have left out, look to the comments, because this a lot of the subscribers on this channel are looking to help each other out and get better themselves. So that's a great resource. So as always, guys, thanks for stopping by. I'm Warshack, and I'm gonna go to bed now. I'm tired as shit, and happy whatever the hell day it is.